Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mommy One Muslim podcast with your co-hosts, Seba Hassan and Uzma Jafri. This is Uzma. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum, and this is Zeba. How are you guys? This is like so fun and exciting doing
I
something new and
know
different.
it's kind of scary. And, as usual, we have our troubleshooting to do, but we have our magic Joe behind the mic and behind stage doing everything for us. So we can't mess it up.
We really,
So,
really appreciate it.
yes, yes, he is all the magic behind how good we look. So thank you, Joe. So Ziba, tell me what fires you had to put out this week because I know you've been busy.
So, I always, whenever I come back from vacation, we all get sick. That is just something that we have to do. And last week, my oldest had strep and the flu. So,
Oh gosh.
dealing with a teenage man child. If you can only imagine what that was like. But alhamdulillah, everybody's on the mend and doing so much better. So I am extremely grateful, just in time for me to start packing up my master bedroom for our final, hopefully, inshallah, last renovation for our house. But you know, it's always something with us. But what is new with you? I heard that you and your son tried something new together this week.
We did. My oldest, as you know, is home educated and he was interested in archery, but really doesn't want to do anything on his own. He's like, I'll do it if you do it on me. And I did archery in PE. I think it was ninth and 10th grade, and I loved it. I thought it was so great. Of course, when I was a very zealous college student, I wanted my kids to learn all the sports that are kind of um, promoted or encouraged by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and archery, horseback riding are two of those sports. So we chose archery because it's a heck of a lot cheaper and you can't get hurt uh, very easily unless you're really dumb. So that was super duper fun. I'm really excited to start doing that with him, and so we're going to be doing those lessons for 6 weeks.
It's like you're prepping for the apocalypse,
Yeah, basically. I think
right?
there's some apocalyptic story about, during the end of days, the Muslims will be riding on horseback and will be archers. So I'm like, okay, let's be archers. He was a little bit like, wait, I mean, aren't the archers who got in trouble in a particular battle in Islam? I'm like, yeah, they were, but we're not going to be those archers. So it was really fun. Yeah.
So, what do we have to worry about in the world this week? Like, could you give me my 2 minutes of, because I'm the ostrich that puts her head in the sand. So, could you give us a little bit of an update about what's going on and the impacts on American Muslims right now?
Yeah, I don't think it even needs to be a 2-minute spiel. I've got like a 30-second one. Focus on impeachment. And a lot of this is not just advice to myself and mothers like myself, it's advice to our Congress and our lawmakers. Focus on impeachment. Don't get distracted by Iran as a war threat, because, of course, it's lower now that Iran kind of made a show of a retaliation and the U.S. made a show of like, oh, we got what we want, but it's all a show. Rest in peace, Flight 756, the Canadian Iranians who were shot down by Iran itself, who admitted that they did it by accident, killing all 176 Canadians on board. So, geopolitical fallout always involves a civilian loss of life. Since 9/11, a Brown University report, it's called The Cost of War, was published in 2018 and suggested that 480,000 Muslims at that time had lost their lives due to this war on terror. And I mean that in quotes, as opposed to 2,605 US civilians lost in the 9/11 attack. So the loss of all life is important and significant. But what are we doing right now? Why are we doing it? We need to stop killing to avenge killing because that doesn't make a civilized society.
That's actually a really good point, and I definitely appreciate your 30 seconds on that. That's our soapbox for today, everybody, and we'll head into our focus topic, which is how we all became mothers. I mean, not the actual physical act of how we became mothers, but
We
love and
could, but that
marriage.
would be another episode.
That's a whole nother episode, but love and marriage was last week, and now you've decided to start a family. And what are the Muslim American experiences with starting a family and raising a family, and how it's different, perhaps, than our non Muslim counterparts? So, um, It's my like, when did you all decide? How long were you guys married? You and Omar married before you guys decided, okay, now it's time. We want to strengthen our bonds and start a family.
Yeah. So we actually weren't married when we decided to have a family. It was the
Oh
second time we
my.
met. The
Okay,
second
I
time we
love
met.
this.
Yeah.
At least we're honest about it. We're going to be honest
Yeah.
about this today, everybody.
Yeah. And so I was third year in medical school, and he was in his residency first year. And he said, it's the second time we've met, so we're still kind of shy around each other and we don't know like what's pushing the envelope. And so he goes, "So what do you think about kids?" And I wanted him to squirm a little. So I was like, "I think they're great." But I knew what he was asking. And so he elaborated. He was like, "Well, what do you think about having kids?" He's an only child. And I said, "Well, that's really the only reason I'm getting married is to have children legally within the bounds of Islam." So I do think they're a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, I'm older and my career kind of there's a time limit for everything. And so having children was time sensitive, A, and then B, um, I was just in a rush to have them. So I kind of explained to him, like, I have no intention to avoid having children, and the sooner we get started, the better.
That's actually a really good point. And it's something important for people to recognize regardless of whatever faith group that you're in. Pre-marriage is probably a good idea to talk about family and family
Mm.
planning and what you want to do within a family and what kind of structure your family life. Because I feel like marriage is so hard without that. And then when you have
Mhm.
children and you're kind of thrown into it, having a basic idea of what and how you want to raise your family um, is very important. So I was joking with you, but I definitely think the first or second time, especially when you are quote unquote dating in the realm of Islam and Muslim dating or halal dating, as we like to call it, you do talk about what your the whole point of the dating aspect. I mean, dating is the only word I can use, but
Yeah.
and getting to know the other person, the whole point is that you're eventually going to get married, right? And in becoming getting married, you're going to become parents. At least that's the hopes and blessings. If you get to do that, and where you want to go from there. So, I always joke that Zephyr kind of said, we're going to have all of our Z kids. And I was just kind of like, oh my God, apparently we're getting married. That's kind of how we kind of
Yes.
did it the backward ways too. But it
Yeah.
ended up working out. So once you had that conversation and you decided to get married, I know yours and my journey towards motherhood was a little bit pretty different. You had
Mhm.
some issues in getting pregnant, and I think you've been pretty open about that with our audience previously. So, how was that for you?
Oh, infertility sucks. Um, Whether you have it medically or you perceive that you have it. And in my case,
And what does
now
that
in
mean? What
hindsight,
does that
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Perception.
perceived. So I thought that I was infertile, but as a physician and with more training, I struggled with it very early. I started my first year of residency as an intern, and that's when I really figured out the science and, what is the medical definition of infertility. And it's if you've been trying for a year and you haven't gotten pregnant, and there's like no abnormality with your hormone levels and stuff like that. So I had gotten tested my first I think within the first 9 months of getting married because I'm like, I don't understand. And now that I look back, I'm like, oh, it was less a medical thing and more an issue of Muslim novices to the physical stuff ineptitude, if I
Oh,
could say it that way.
interesting. Okay. Okay. Well, that's okay.
There
I
was
get it.
some like, yeah, there was some misunderstandings about how this is going to happen.
Because we just
And
don't know.
yeah,
I mean, that's the
yeah.
problem.
Yeah, so I just didn't know what I didn't know, and then when I figured out the science, because my doctor told me when I met her within 9 months of getting married, I was like, "I don't understand why I'm not getting pregnant." She was like, "Well, you're in your 4th year, you just got married, you're about to move cross country, you've been interviewing for residency, you're gonna start a very challenging lifestyle in July with your residency. I imagine that things will settle down by the fall, and that's when you'll get pregnant." And she was dead right. she got it. Nail
So
on
as
the head.
soon as
And
like
that's
the stress piece, the external stress, you
mhm,
were able to relax, and then your body was, because you didn't have any diagnosed fertility issues per se. It was just not happening in the way that you were hopeful that it would
no.
happen.
No, but we did end up going to an infertility specialist, right it was either right after or right as we got pregnant, because at that point we met the medical definition because we'd been married for over a year and we had not gotten pregnant despite using no birth control ever. I did have one trial of birth control before I got married and it had really bad side effects. And so that kind of petrified me forever. I was like, I'm not gonna do that. And so, and plus I wanted to get pregnant. So there was really no reason at that point. So yeah, we did see the infertility specialist and we were planning on doing IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, but we needed to go through some workup. And she asked us to come back with the next missed period. And alhamdulillah, never got that period. So she actually, when she was doing my ultrasound in the office, I saw my oldest as an egg.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah. So she was like, you should use that one. It's ready. But I think he was either on his way to getting fertilized or had already been fertilized. So I'm not sure.
So after you had your oldest, did you have issues with fertility from that point on, or was it just like that first time? Because you kind of had them back to back, from
Yeah, no,
my
after that,
understanding.
the thing is when you are struggling with infertility, whether like in my case, I believe it was perceived. Like I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. I was absorbing a lot of external pressure from the parents of an only child who wanted a grandchild very badly, from my mother, who, as you remember from last week's episode, thought I had no eggs
Yes,
left. Yeah.
that's exactly
Um,
right.
so I have that. I have this very challenging work schedule where I'm working 80 hours a week and I have to find time to make this baby, which is really hard to do when you're super tired and busy. Um, and then I made a lot of dua, especially in tahajjud, because I was like, well, that's one of the best times to make dua. Every time I've ever wanted anything in my life, that's what I would do.
And can you
And
explain Tahajjud
oh,
for our non-Muslim listeners?
the Hajj is a voluntary prayer. So Muslims have five obligatory prayers that they have to perform based on the movement of the sun throughout the day. But the Hajj is that time between the night prayer and right before the dawn prayer. And Muslims believe that this is when God is at the lowest of the heavens and he's like, ask me so that I may grant your prayers. And this is one of the more accepted times for your prayers. And it's completely optional. You're not accountable for not doing it. But anytime I've really wanted something and wanted to have that alone time with God to just talk to Him, that is the time that I've done it. And I particularly relied on the prayers of two prophets, Prophet Zechariah and or
Yay.
Zechariah. Yes, we all love that name, and then Prophet Ayub or Job in other scripture, that's his name. So for Zechariah, I believe, and also biblical scripture, he had children in very old age, and Muslims believe that as well. The translation of his prayer is, "My Lord, your, grant me from yourself a good offspring. Indeed, you are the hearer of supplication or prayer." And then the prayer of Job, the translation is, "Verily distress has seized me, and you are the most merciful of all those who show mercy." So, there's particular prayers that you want to make according to what you're asking for. And for me, I was really, my whole life I had wanted to be two things. One was a doctor, and one was a mom. And God had granted me medicine. I was starting my career, but I was like, well, now I'm greedy and I want the baby. Can I have it fast, before these eggs run out? So I
Oh,
was making these two prayers because I was like, it's not just me as a mother that's on the line. I have two other mothers that are depending on this right now. So if you could just grant that, my life would be absolutely complete, is what I thought. That was the story that I created. So these were the prayers and when I used them at the time. So
well,
yeah, and I
that's,
when you make prayers like that, you gotta be careful what you ask for, because Allah opened the floodgates, and it
and
was
then
like
it's like,
back to back to
hello,
back.
within 5 years, right? Didn't you have the babies within 5 years of each other?
Um, the first 3
6.
were born in 3 years,
Oh
and
my
then
goodness.
yeah, because I started mothering at, 2008, and I finished in 2015 was my last one.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't envy you.
But I caught up to you.
You did. I mean, that's true. Yeah, I have to say,
How was
even
Turkey different?
yeah, so my journey was different, and like, and you and I were kind of having a conversation before we started recording today, because I've been pretty blessed in the sense that I haven't had any issues. And um I hope my kids don't listen to this, but 3 out of 4 were kind of accident babies and kind of just happened. And by accident, they weren't planned by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously God has a plan, an overall plan, and I don't regret any of them. But the reality of the situation, I wasn't necessarily ready for them when they happened to
Hmm.
come, and so I just didn't know, or know how to talk to people that have had issues in getting pregnant, or a perception of getting pregnant, because you know for full disclosure, 3 out of 4 were birth control babies. On some, so
You're
it
one of
doesn't
those
necessarily
women.
work for, yeah. So it doesn't necessarily work for me.
Yeah.
So that's why we had to go do a different route. For full disclosure, but I just have a hard time because I have been blessed, and being a mother has always been my number one thing in my life that I one dedicate to, hence this Momming While Muslim podcast. And two is really how I identify myself. I wear multiple hats, but being a mom is one of them. So I just have a hard time. Uh, I don't know what to say to somebody that's going through something that you've gone through. So do you have any advice for people that are, have a friend or a colleague or sister or cousin that's going through infertility, and how to provide them comfort um, in their time of obvious stress? Because it is a stressful situation for people that are going through it.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, it's really important when there's a married couple who doesn't have kids within, 6 weeks of getting married, within 3 years of getting married. I do not think it's an appropriate question to ask them. So when are you planning to have kids? It's none of
Exactly.
our business. And it's like, we don't know what their struggle is. We don't know what their story is. Don't rub salt in their wounds. Shut up. And maybe they have a grander plan than the rest of us who are just fly by the seat of our pants. Let's just have them. Um, Omar did have the concern. He's like, well, isn't it going to be hard during residency and while we're so poor to have children and this and that? And I was like, listen, when's a good time to have kids? They're always inconvenient. They poop, they barf, they can't talk. You have to do everything for them. Tell me when they're convenient. And he was like, oh, well, that's a good point. So, maybe these people are smarter and they've got a plan in mind, or maybe they are struggling with something, with conceiving, and we should just shut up, mind our own business. The couple is happy, leave them alone. I personally tell people who are married and have not had kids, don't travel the world, enjoy your hot meals and fancy restaurants and vacations and sleeping in every day of the week, because it's never ever going to happen again. The fact that you can poop in privacy, it will go away. So the longer you can delay it, the better. What's your
So,
advice?
my advice is, I mean, I don't really have any, in the sense that
Hmm.
I
Because you
feel
never
like
experienced it.
one, I
Hmm.
never experienced it, but I also think that I'm a firm believer in God's plan,
Hmm.
whatever that plan happens to be. And I don't know if that's come with age. Now in my 40s, I feel like I'm definitely more, I can control certain things, and some things I can't. And perhaps this is just what I need to go through, whatever it is. And I think it's applicable to fertility issues and non-fertility issues, or any kind of challenges that we have to go through on a day-to-day basis. Like, what are the things that I can control, and how to stop the negative narrative in my head? And that's just what I'm going to try to focus on. And my advice to people is, focus on your day-to-day, and not let the negative thoughts get in your way, because I think that that does add an unnecessary stress to your situation, and it's not going to be helpful for you regardless.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody should ever feel, because I mean, how I felt when I couldn't get pregnant was, fear. I felt inadequate, like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm broken, like some of the women in my family who struggled with infertility. And they were very distant relatives, but my mom had convinced me, despite my scientific background, despite my medical background, my mom had convinced me that maybe I had inherited some of this, and that's why I wasn't having a kid. So I'm broken because I can't have these kids, or what I think is worse is I was like, well, Allah's punishing me for my past sins. Of course, I'm not
Right.
going to have children because He doesn't think I'm worthy of them. I'm not worthy of completing this dua. And that was probably the worst thing I could do to myself because I was denying the first thing we believe about Allah, which is that He's Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. He's the most kind and the most merciful. Why would He withhold forgiveness for our past sins that we've already repented and we've already, committed to not repeating? Why would He not have mercy and give me this? So I think always believing in the best, the positive attributes of Allah is really, really important and not letting yourself get beat down. And then, what I did find out when I finally confided in a really old friend of mine that I was struggling, because she did ask me in private, like, hey, what's going on? Are you happy? Is everything okay? I thought you wanted to have kids right away. And I explained to her at that time, and I got really emotional, like, this isn't happening. I think this, and this is happening to me right now. Allah hates me. And she was like, no, no, that's not the case. And don't you know, this person and that person and this third person had it too. And, they did all these things. And these are also close friends. And I was like, so hurt that nobody talked about it. I was like, why didn't you guys talk about this and let us know so that we could communicate? But there was no centralized resource for moms struggling with these things. And I feel like while a lot of non Muslim blogs and resources and sites offer a lot of really important critical support for, folks struggling with infertility, they're kind of missing a little bit of the spiritual aspect that we need to always have hope in Allah and always have hope in that um, he's if he's not granting a dua for you right now, if he's not granting a prayer that you're making, there is wisdom behind it. Maybe it's not the right time for you, and he's going to bring you something better. And I think remembering in those promises of Allah is going to be really, really important.
No, I definitely feel that you're 100% right. It is the spiritual aspect and just even in general in like the mental health field, like having more Muslim people be a part of that that group would be so great, and because it will definitely provide resources for us because we do have different challenges. We're all the same, trust me. But like to your point, getting solace and comfort in a different way would be very, very helpful. So let me ask you this, since you're the doctor, how do you know, like once you get that pregnancy test and you've taken like 50 of them, right? Because that's usually what happens when you first are like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. Like in my
Mhm.
case, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe that this is happening. But like for people that are trying, they're like, oh my God, super excited. And you've taken like 10, 15 just to confirm. How do you know, like, what are the signs and symptoms people can look for to kind of differentiate between like a normal pregnancy versus an abnormal pregnancy?
Well, first, I'll say that the difference between a normal and abnormal pregnancy, you should rely on your doctor in order to figure that out. And, we're going to put in our show notes some links to, I guess, the Bible of pregnancy, which is What to Expect When You're Expecting
Yes.
by Heidi Murkoff, I believe it is. And so,
Sadly, I just
even
gave
I
away
read
my
that book.
copy. I just
Oh,
gave
okay,
away
good.
my
You had one
copy
too.
officially. I was like, okay, I'm giving this away.
Oh, no, I still have mine. It's part of my library. I'm not letting it go. So, as a physician reading it, as a physician taking care of pregnant moms and delivering pregnant moms, I found it very, very helpful. It was obviously not the medical textbook that I relied on because I'm going to always worry about worst case scenario. That is normal pregnancies for the most part in that book. And so you should rely on that and on your doctors. Um, I think I'm trying to find, yeah. All right. And then, of course, you want to find your mom groups, seasoned moms who have gone through this, who can tell you, like, hey, that round ligament pain is normal. You're probably having a girl, right? Oh, okay.
So did you do, okay,
Mhm.
so back in the day it was baby center. Does that still exist? Did you do that? And it would be
Oh,
like
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
joined your birth
This is
group,
your
right? So
week.
it'd be
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
August whatever, and then it gave you the week by
Yeah.
week and then you were able, I don't know if people still do that. Like I'm totally aging
I don't
myself. Does
know.
that even exist anymore?
Yeah, no. I used
I'll
to
have to
get
look
their
that up.
updates, up until I delivered for, I think, the 3rd one, and then the last one I didn't even do because I was like, I don't need this anymore." But yeah, Kelly Mom, Baby Center, those were the places that I went to
Yeah.
find out, and then a lot of it was just knowing medically what was going on, but I would still, as a physician, talk to my OB and say, "Hey, this is going on," and I think that that's really important. Now, at the same time, while I'm saying compare notes with other moms, I'm not saying that you should by any means minimize any symptoms that you think are weird because your experience, despite the fact that it's relative, is important. And if it's really worrying you, bothering you, scaring you, you need to discuss it with your doctor. So don't just stop because, oh, XYZ mom, she's had like 17 kids and it never happened to her. Doesn't matter. You could be the special snowflake. I think it's really important for you to follow up.
And
At the same
even like
time,
morning
mhm.
sickness, all that, like it
Oh, yeah.
changes per baby, per, per person.
Every pregnancy is
So
different.
every
Hmm.
pregnancy is different and every person is
Yeah,
different. So I think that's
exactly.
very, very key to remember.
Yeah, I always tell my patients every body is different and everybody is different. So, at the same time as not minimizing your symptoms, I would also say don't be a hypochondriac, don't be a worrywart. The most important thing you can do is once your baby starts moving, after the quickening, I just always made it a practice to make my patients kick count, and I kick
Yes.
counted a so if my kid didn't get his kick counts, I was in the OB triage, and I was like, "Figure this out. Make sure he's alive," you know? Because again, I'm worst case scenario and, your insurance is paying for it, just go do it. By the 3rd time I did that, they were like, "Okay, we're not letting you go home. We're just inducing this baby because we're tired of seeing your face." That is a
That's so
possibility.
funny.
So if you're gonna go a lot, just know that eventually they're all gonna be saying, okay, this is a really anxious first time mom. Just put her in the hospital and do a whole bunch of tests and possibly induce. And I know a lot of millennial moms now are like super scared of induction and super scared of C-sections, which, you should be. It's one of the most barbaric procedures out there, like to see, it's very gruesome. The first time I saw it, I walked into my OB rotation as a third year student like convinced I'm going to be an OB, I'm going to do high risk pregnancy. I walked into my first C-section, I looked up, her uterus is actually sitting on top of her chest
Oh
because they
my
pulled it
God, I
out.
don't want to know that. I had three, um, my youngest, my Z4
Uh-huh.
was a emergency C-section.
Okay.
And I do have to say that it was extremely difficult to recover. I still feel like
Things got
I'm
well,
recovering. Yeah. Is that
things got to go
weird?
through
No. And they
so
thought
much
like
fun.
you'll be walking out of here. Which the other ones were mashallah so quick and
Sure.
easy, but he was just a very from the get-go, my biggest one of my biggest blessings. But honestly, the delivery was super stressful and challenging. Did you have that experience? Did you have a C-section or a difficult delivery? Because yeah, that C-section, I feel like 6 years later, I'm still recovering from.
No, alhamdulillah. My pregnancies were all really healthy, really good. I do think I had diabetes with my 4th one, but I refused to get tested.
Oh
Doctors make the
no.
worst patients, so don't do that, okay? Like, I knew what to look out for. If you don't, please get tested, okay? It's really important. Really bad stuff can happen to diabetic mothers, but worse things can happen to their babies. So please don't do that. I put my child at risk, but I knew what warning signs to look for. That was my last pregnancy. I was older, my body hurt. For the majority of that pregnancy, I knew he was facing my rectum.
Oh
So if you can
no.
imagine how awful it was awful. But that wasn't even the worst pregnancy. Like I said, all of them were, generally really good. Alhamdulillah, I was pretty healthy. But with my first, again, I'm working 80 hours, I'm pregnant. I don't think it was related to a lot of the activity and the physical labor that I was doing. I think it just, I had this weird placental issue and nobody knew. There was no way for the doctors to tell until it actually happened. So he was born 3 weeks early because I started hemorrhaging and it was really bad. I don't remember what happened after my delivery because I went into shock. I needed blood transfusions. So there was that complication. And so for 5 hours, I had to be sedated because I was in such shock. I wasn't safe, and they had to sedate me to kind of calm me down. After delivery, as some of us know, all of us go through some shock because we've lost so much volume of fluids. All that amniotic fluid is out of you. All of these other body fluids are out of you. Blood is out of you. And so you do have the shakes, but mine was manifested with like, I was bouncing up and down off the bed. So I needed to be sedated
Oh
medically.
no.
Yeah, so I didn't get to see my son for the first 5, 6 hours of his birth, and he just basically sucked on my husband's finger until I woke up, which was really nice of him to do because he knew how committed I was to breastfeeding, and, Yeah, he did that for me, but I just woke up angry, like I missed out on the first hours of his life. So, yeah, that was my complication. Was Z4 like your most complicated? Was that the most complicated story you had?
Well, yeah, because we ended up in ICU for a couple weeks afterwards. Yeah, so we were in
Oh,
and thank goodness for my brother and who was doing residency here and my sister-in-law at the time, because they essentially
yeah.
moved in to help with the
Aw.
other three. And I couldn't even see the other three because
Right,
it
'cause in
was
the hospital.
February. They're not allowed to come into the ICU. And think about this way, Z3 was only like 24, 25 months. So he was still
Oh,
a
baby.
baby at the time. And,
Yeah.
thank God for Hareem. Like, if she's listening to this, I have to
We love
say,
you,
like,
Marie.
I love you so much. Really, because we did not have family. Like, if we did not have them here, and then sadly they went back to Chicago, but if we did not have them here, I don't know what I would have done, because like I was literally trapped in the hospital. Like, my recovery was terrible. Zan's recovery was terrible. Unfortunately, it was one of those situations where we had this emergency C-section, and the doctors, when he came out, were like shaking their head,
Oh,
like,
no.
and I'm trying to see that, and I'm like, is he not crying? What's going on? And Zephyr's trying to comfort me. And the truth of the matter is, when you go and you think, um, did I get greedy? Right? Like, that
Oh,
was
with
the
number
thought.
4? Mhm.
Yeah, I was like, I was so blessed with the three that I had, and I almost died, and he almost died. And it's like, did I get greedy? Like, is this God's
Yeah.
way of trying to put some hubris in me? But I do realize that that experience made me appreciate, one, the support system that I do have, with my brother at the time, my sister-in-law, my children, my husband, and our family that, we make with our friends, that kind of stepped up and helped me through that process, because the recovery was a long time.
Of
And I,
course.
and I was also committed to the breastfeeding, and this trying to breastfeed with a C-section, and you're like, you can't even
Miserable.
walk it, and he's in the ICU, so I'm trying to go to a different part of the hospital to go with him. And ultimately, once he was stabilized, he was able to come into the room with me. But it was a traumatic experience, and something that I think about often. So like, his
Yeah.
birthday is a bittersweet time for me, right? I look at him, and mashallah, he's grown, and he's just like the spitfire of a kid. But I do remember his first year in general was a very traumatic year. So God has
Yeah.
blessed us, and that's all you can say, because
Alhamdulillah.
we didn't, by God's grace, regardless of a lot of these health issues that we did face with him, we never really had a loss, so
Yeah.
a pregnancy loss. And I can't even imagine
No.
parents that have to go through that, because we were on the cusp a couple of times. And you know I don't know how I would have survived, to be honest with you. Like, so for those moms and dads that are out there that are or have experienced that, like, just know that I'm praying for you. And I can't even imagine, and you're not alone. And I actually have a friend who, well, I just recently met her, and she did lose a child. And I always think, like, how do you even help
Recover.
somebody like that? Or or how to, and she posted on Facebook, and I was thinking, like, this is actually a really good lesson. She's like, you know what, you can even just say, I don't know what to say. And
Yeah.
that in and of itself makes somebody feel like, because a lot of times you do want to ignore it, right? Or just, I don't want to bring
Not
it
talk
up,
about it.
or
Yeah.
not talk about it. And that was probably the biggest lessons I learned recently, that sometimes you can just say, I don't know what to say, and
Mhm.
what can I do for you?
Mhm.
um so yeah, again, been on the cusp a couple times, and by God's grace, that I'm so thankful that that didn't happen, even though we were close with him specifically. So I can't even imagine what it would be like to actually lose a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah. Yeah, especially like so there's like the spectrum of miscarriages, whether you have a stillbirth, which is the child is born usually like a cord related death or we have spontaneous, we have missed abortions, and that was a lot of what I would diagnose. So I was really used to letting mothers know when they came into the emergency room, like, hey, this is probably a miscarriage, and they would say, well, what are you going to do to stop it? I'm like, there's really nothing we can do. When it's early first trimester losses, like, you know there may be something. I think a lot of women, especially in the Muslim community that I've met who have suffered losses, will blame themselves often and say, it's because I went to the emergency room, they did a transvaginal ultrasound,
Yeah.
which is sometimes necessary for those early pregnancies to get a good look. Because an abdominal one just doesn't pick up what's wrong with the
Yeah.
peanut, because that's the size of your kid. It's like a peanut. And they will say, it's because I did that. It compromised my cervix and I lost my baby because of that ultrasound. And it's like, no, please don't blame yourself. Please don't blame the doctors. Usually a first trimester loss, there's something that Allah didn't want coming out into this world. You got a taste of this. Now you know what it's like. And in the Muslim belief, if you've lost any pregnancy, whether it's in utero or whether it's a neonatal death, we do have the belief that that child, will go to heaven, because they've never had the opportunity to sin, and they will hold the door of Jannah for their mothers, which means the door to heaven for their moms. And I think that that's a really beautiful, supposed to be a
Comforting.
source of comfort for these parents. But again, not having gone through it myself, I can only sympathize. I can never empathize because I do not know how they feel. And I think that we do have some lovely resources that we're putting up in our show notes. A lot of work is being done because I think that the trauma that carries, with a lot of women, because they don't talk about it. Like, I know somebody very close to me who will never talk about her pregnancy loss. It is, if we ever tried to bring it up, she would bite our heads off. So
Right.
it was like, maybe quietly you can go to these resources. And if you want to talk about it, I would suggest, maybe as somebody who suffered, bring it up to those of us who haven't, so that we can be more educated. But if only if you're comfortable, only if you're comfortable. But I think it's only through discussion that we can get better,
Yeah, that's right.
right? So, Zeva, you talked about Z4, but I want to go back to your first experience with Z1.
Yes.
How did you choose his name?
So this is a really funny thing. Ask anybody that has known me since I was a kid, including you. And I have always loved two names. And my
Hmm.
two names were Zachariah and Zara.
No way.
And I was always like, I am gonna have my first son is gonna be Zachariah, or Zachariah, depending on how you pronounce it. And the reason why it was very important for me was the meaning. Obviously, you
Hmm.
so eloquently pointed out the dua and the meaning, and he's a very important um, prophet. He's a minor prophet, but he was definitely somebody that I resonated with for those reasons that you had stated earlier. And for me, being a cross cultural name, depending on how you would pronounce it, right? Whether it's Zachariah or Zachariah, the meaning stays the same. And obviously,
Right,
we
right.
name our kids by the meaning.
By good
We're
meanings, right.
by the meanings, like how, and I waited, we had a couple of other names on the table, and I wanted to wait for him. We kind of, you probably did the same thing. You come up with a list of names, and actually my friend, um I had a friend that had given me like a Muslim name book, and some of these things just kind of came out. And, we teased that we were going to name all of our kids Z names, but, we had non Z names on the table too. We wanted to wait and see what they looked like. And Zachy just looked like an old man when he came out.
He doesn't
And
anymore, though.
he doesn't anymore. But at the time, he looked like this cute little old man. And I was like, Zachariah, it's such a heavy name, and
Yeah.
I always wanted to have his full name be said.
Uh,
Um, and it means may Lord, or the Lord remembers, or God will always remember you. And it was just so important for me. One, he did look like a old guy, and two, just the meaning of the name was so beautiful that, you know like both of us saw him. We're like, okay, it's, we had a couple of other names on the table, including Keon and Cyrus, and a couple of beautiful names that in and of themselves, but he just didn't look like any of those names.
Mhm.
But yeah, for me, names have a huge meaning, and that is a pretty important part of our naming culture in Islam and in the Indo-Pak culture specifically. In naming your children, kind of what they're meaning, it's more on meaning, I think, right?
Yeah,
Than
it's meaning
even
because
what
that
it's,
manifests in their personality.
yeah. And it manifests
And
in the person,
it's
like,
mhm.
and for me, for Zara, like she was actually Kira for a long time, to be honest with you. Like Zephyr and
Oh,
I were saying Kira, like nobody knows this because it's like an Irish name that kind of sounds desi. And then my father-in-law, I love him. He's like the most blunt, amazing man, by the way, like such a great role model for the rest of my men. But like he would say, everyone's going to say Kira, and then it's a
oh,
bug,
which means
and
insect.
then bug, and I was like, I don't want my baby to
Oh,
be
you're
called
right.
bug. So Kira in Irish, it was like a flower, but Kira in
Yeah,
Urdu was like a
Gita is
bug. And
that.
I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, I don't want people to call her Kira. So, but when she came out, she looked like a Zara, and it just worked out. And now to this day, I have to say, all of my kids have told me that they love their names. So I
Oh.
feel like I must have done a decent job. But how did you choose your first name?
So, in utero, my oldest was Zakaria, and I
Oh,
did not
that's really,
remember.
I didn't know
I love
that.
that name. I had no idea because remember you started your motherhood
Journey
journey a
a
lot earlier
little bit
than I did.
earlier, yes.
So,
But that's okay. A
I
lot
was
of people have Zachariah and Zara now. Like I was like, oh, who
yeah,
knew it would have been such a popular name?
loved the name Zakaria, and I was making the dua of that prophet to have him. So I was like,
Right,
it just
exactly.
and then on top of that, that was my husband's maternal grandfather's name, who
Oh,
died
that's
very
beautiful.
young and, never really got to see my husband born or grow
Grow
up or
up.
anything. So I was like, this would be a nice homage to Nana Boo as well. And Omar was totally on board. And of course, there's a whole nother side of the family that did not appreciate that. But everybody in my family knew that the little lump in my tummy was Zakaria. And so a lot of people who saw me after I had him would call him Zakaria because they thought that was his name.
Oh, that was his, and you're like, no, it's
And
not.
it's not because, of course, in my sedated state after having him, my husband sidled up and decided to change his name
Are
because he
you kidding?
yeah, literally, he went to a completely medically compromised woman and was like, played the emotional violin and was like, "Can I change the name to this name that I don't know? I don't know any Rayhans." And I'm like, "Then you are the biggest coconut I've ever met because I know 34." It is like one of the most common names. And actually, in the Muslim world, Rayhan is typically a girl's name.
Right.
But subcontinental people use it a lot for men. And so I compromised on Rehan. I had wanted it Abdurrahman, but there was some backlash about that because there were some family members who really did not want an overtly Muslim name
Right.
because they wanted
Interesting.
to be able to. They were like, we don't want people to know that he's Muslim. I'm like, who's going to be walking around with him? It's going to be
Yeah,
me.
but that's actually a really interesting point, right? Because part of my I want well, our last name is Hassan, right? So it's probably the most Muslim last name you can possibly have,
Yeah,
alhamdulillah. But I wanted names where my non-Muslim family would be able to easily pronounce them, right? So that was part of when we were thinking about the names was I wanted one, the meaning to not change depending on how you pronounced it, one.
right.
Two, for my non-Muslim family members to be able to pronounce it properly, and three, like to be blunt with you, it really sucked when people, can you imagine the substitute teachers when they would have to call
Oh,
your name in class and nobody would know how to pronounce it? I just wanted it to be
hmm
super easy for people to pronounce, but you'd be surprised by how many people mispronounce my names, even with all that the thought I put into it. So then I
oh my
realized
gosh.
you should
It
just
doesn't
name
matter.
them Abdul Rahman.
Just
It
name them what you
really
want.
doesn't matter because
Yeah.
people are not going to know how to say these names regardless. And
Yeah.
it was funny because when I was having Zaid, actually the name we were calling him for a couple of days before I signed the birth certificate was actually Ilyas.
Oh, I
And
love that name.
yeah, and it just when you say it and you say it and you say it, and you're like, he is just not an Ilias, and
Mm,
or Elias was the other way to pronounce it. And literally over text, my husband said Zaid, and it just stuck, and it
stuck.
felt in my
And it was a
stomach,
Z name. You have to
and it
do
happened to
it.
be a Z name. And I'm like, yeah, you're Zaid. And now I have a nephew named Ilya. So it worked out for me. I get to have both names in my family, and I just love it. But,
Yeah.
names are a fun part of being a parent. That's the beauty that we get to do. We get to create the first part of our children's identity. But something that people don't really talk about or think about are the rights that these Muslim children or children in general have.
hmm
And specifically in Islam. So, did you want to talk a little bit about like what are the rights of Muslim children?
Yeah. So this is something that I think people are realizing now that there's this whole respectful parenting movement, but it turns out it's been a part of Islam
From the
since
very
its
beginning?
inception. Yeah.
Yes.
So children in Islam have certain rights, and obviously it's going to be love and care. That's like, please don't be a parent if you can't provide love and care to a child. So most of us, if we've embarked on this journey, are willing to offer it. So there's that. And then even before the child is conceived, the partners that you choose for yourself, your child has a right over that. Your unborn child has a right to good parents. So that means if there's any single people listening to this, I don't know how many of you guys are out there, but that you should look at your potential spouse as a potential parent and see, is this somebody that I could raise children with? And that is also a right of children. And we talked about arranged marriages on episode 43 last week. So feel free to tune in and brush up on that. Your child has a right to a good name within 7 days of its birth. So that's super important. Um, some of the other rituals that are performed for your child, and this is from the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or what he used to do when a newborn was born, is recite the adhan or the call to prayer that Muslims do 5 times a day before their obligatory prayers in their right ears. And then smear a little date. Like you take the meat of the date and smear it and put it on the palate at the top of the baby's mouth, that curved part of their mouth. And what that does is it, hastens their suck reflex, which is really good for those kids who are late pretermers who aren't really good suckers and will have a little bit of trouble at the breast because they can't get their suck right or their latch right. But even more important medically, I think what it does is it starts getting their bowels moving because remember they've been at rest in utero and now these kids are out. Or if you have had a
That
child
gross
before,
black poop, right? The
the black poop,
meconium.
the
Oh,
greasy
yuck.
junk, that little tar that they poop out for the first
We got to
five
get
days,
that out.
you want to get all of that mess out. It's really, really important to get it out, and the dates help speed so it shows us like these foods from the Sunnah, like the medicine of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a real thing, and I can say that as a physician that allopath and our Sunnah medicine can go together. So I think that's really important, and then being taught Islamic knowledge, which will come later, and we'll address that in later episodes. But this is at birth, I think, is all really important stuff to maintain for the child. And then, do you want to talk a little bit about being a Muslim patient? Like, did you have any issues, or feel
You,
like there were things that you wish,
you
were
know,
addressed better?
yeah. So like my thing is because it is a very we're just more conservative, right? I'm not going to be walking around with things all hanging out. So for me, having a private room was really, really important. Because I just didn't want people coming in and out. And when I'm nursing, I did a lot of that skin on skin contact, and I wanted to have a little bit more freedom with that. And I don't even wear hijab, but in general, I wanted to have a little bit of that privacy.
hmm
So, specifically having a doctor that you're comfortable with. I went to um, a practice that was all female because I just
hmm
felt more comfortable. This is not a Muslim thing or a non-Muslim thing. Just for me personally, I felt more comfortable. And regardless of whichever doctor was on call, I knew I would get a female. So that was really important to me. Um, and honestly, like I thought about the home birth and all of that, but Zephyr is very anti. He's like, you should have if you have the medical, if you have the medical um ability right at your fingertips, why put yourself at risk? So I didn't get to do my hippie home birth, but You should ultimately just always feel safe in your pregnancy and delivery, regardless of whether you choose to have it at the hospital or at home with a medical expert to come to the house with you. I feel like it's such a personal journey, and it should be how you want it to be, but also keep in mind it's never exactly how you picture it to be, and you should feel okay having, like, if you decided I'm going to go get an epidural and you wanted it to do what you do in order to make yourself feel comfortable. But did you have any issues, considering you do wear hijab? Like, did you have any specifics for doctors that you wanted during the delivery process, or were you in so much pain you just didn't care?
Oh, no, I was never in any pain because all of my kids were induced, all 4.
You're like, oh, okay, so you're
Yeah.
like, I got this
Every single
done.
one was induced, and they were all, vaginal deliveries. I never had a C-section, and I scheduled all except 2 of those. Yeah, 50% were induced, scheduled, and 50% were like, "Oh, we have to because there's an emergency going on," or whatever. Um, but like you, I chose an all-woman practice, and they shared call with another all-woman practice because I was like, "I never want a doctor on call to be a male to show up." However, it was at a teaching hospital. So with I think one of the deliveries, the chief resident, OB resident, who they're very skilled, was a guy. But I was like, "Hey, I like you. You taught me and stuff. So there's 2 reasons not to be with you because I have to look at
Yeah,
your
that's
face.
weird.
I have to
Yeah,
work with you.
that's
And then
weird.
second, like I would just rather you not see my hoo-ha." So it was great when you have a no and you're at the hospital where you work, like you have a lot of pull and you can get the room you want and the nurse you want, and your delivery, I say, is only as good as your OB labor nurse, right? Do you agree as a
Right.
patient?
I
Oh my
totally agree
gosh.
with that.
The nurse can make or break you. And if she says you can push, because there was a couple of times where the brakes actually got kicked up on my bed and they were trying to get me to C-section. One of those times I stopped them and I said, "Stop, I can get this out. Like, I will show you I can get this out now." And then one of them, the nurse stopped and she said, "No, Dr. Joffrey can do this. She can have this kid."
Aw,
Yeah. So it was like, all of them. By the last one, I think I pushed once. Might have blinked. I'm not
yes.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you're
Because
like,
it's a dog's
"Oops,
door.
it came out on the way to the hospital." No, that's
Basically.
actually
Yeah.
that's actually right. But,
Yeah.
I feel like first of all, it was very eye-opening for me today to kind of hear your experience, because we've never really talked about this, and because that was the period of our life where we're kind of so busy being a mom
Busy
and
doing it.
doing
Yeah.
doing it, that we like, you just don't really get to connect with the people that you would love to otherwise. So I appreciate hearing that story. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, and with the audience. And my hopes is that for people that are going through it, perceived or not perceived, like, please know that there's hope on the other end, and inshallah, you'll get through this hardship.
Yeah. And we didn't talk about adoption, but we do have a really great resource we found from Wise Up Online in our show notes. While biological parenthood is awesome,
Awesome.
adoptive parenthood is also a sunnah, and it is really, really important. I feel like a lot of people have misconceptions about adoption being haram or not allowed or forbidden in Islam, and that's not the case. So please get educated, read about it, and if you don't know enough, ask. We have a lot of adoptive parents in the Muslim community now. Alhamdulillah, I'm so, so glad, because it's very much needed in our community right here in America. Forget about international adoptions, like just in America, we need it so badly. So
Yes.
please look up our show notes. Thanks for joining us today and letting us talk about really these memorable times that we are so glad to not repeat, inshallah.
Ex- and first time on Facebook Live, recording
Yes,
our
we did
podcast, so
it.
that we did
Yeah,
it. Let's hope it actually works. But
inshallah.
until next time, and see you guys next week. I hope you guys have a peaceful week this week.
All right, Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum.